Behind the golden gates of Buckingham Palace, where centuries of tradition meet modern reality, a storm was brewing that would test the very foundations of the British monarchy. What started as whispered concerns about family loyalty would explode into a confrontation so dramatic that it would leave the Queen Consort unconscious on the marble floor of the throne room, with royal guards rushing to her aid. This is the untold story of how King Charles III made a decision that would forever change his relationship with his beloved wife Camilla, revealing the brutal reality that even in matters of the heart, the crown must always come first. When family scandals threaten the monarchy's reputation, someone must make the ultimate sacrifice, but no one expected it would tear apart the royal marriage that had survived decades of public scrutiny. What you're about to read is a tale of power, betrayal, family loyalty, and the crushing weight of a crown that demands everything from those who wear it. It's a story that proves that in the world of royalty, love is never enough when duty calls. The morning mist hung heavy over Windsor Castle as King Charles III stood at his study window, watching the groundskeepers tend to the pristine gardens below. The weight of the crown jewels seemed lighter than the burden pressing on his shoulders that October morning. In his weathered hands, he held a leather folder marked with the royal seal, its contents threatening to unravel everything he and Camilla had built together. Private Secretary Sir Clive Alderton had delivered the folder at dawn, his usually composed face etched with worry. The intelligence report contained photographs, financial documents, and witness statements that painted a disturbing picture of Camilla's extended family. Her nephew, Marcus Parker Bowles, had been photographed leaving a high-end casino in Monaco at 3 a.m, his arms wrapped around two women who were not his wife. The images were damaging enough, but what followed was far worse. The report detailed Marcus's mounting gambling debts, totaling nearly £2 million, owed to some of Europe's most dangerous financial operators. Security services had intercepted communications suggesting he was prepared to sell stories about private royal family moments to the highest bidding tabloid. The palace had weathered many storms, but this felt different. This was family betraying family, using intimate knowledge as currency. Charles remembered the conversation he'd had with Camilla just 2 weeks earlier. She had been radiant that evening, discussing plans for their upcoming state visit to Australia. They had walked through the palace gardens as the sun set, her hand in his, talking about how proud she was of her nephew's apparent success in his business ventures. The irony was crushing. While she praised Marcus's achievements, he was systematically planning to destroy everything they held sacred. The king's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on his study door. Camilla entered, carrying his morning tea on a silver tray, her smile warm and genuine. She wore a simple blue dress that complemented her silver hair, and, in that moment, she looked every inch the devoted wife rather than the queen consort. The contrast between her innocence and the evidence in his hands made Charles's chest tighten with emotion. "You're up early again, darling," she said, setting the tray on his desk. "The staff mentioned you've been in here since 5:30. Her eyes noticed the folder immediately, and her expression shifted to concern. "More state business? You work too hard, Charles. Even kings need rest." Charles watched his wife's face, searching for any sign that she might know what her family members were planning. He found nothing but genuine care and affection. The woman who had stood by him through scandals, public ridicule, and the transformation from heir to monarch was completely unaware that her own blood relatives were preparing to sell their secrets to the press. "Sit with me, my dear," Charles said, his voice carefully measured. "We need to discuss some family matters." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, the same chair where they had planned charity events, discussed state dinners, and shared quiet moments away from the public eye. Camilla settled into the chair, her hands folded in her lap. "Is everything all right? You look troubled." Her intuition had always been remarkable. Throughout their long relationship, she had been able to read his moods better than anyone, including his own children. Today, however, her gift for understanding him would become a curse. Charles opened the folder slowly, his fingers trembling slightly. The first photograph showed Marcus Parker Bowles stumbling out of the Monaco casino, his shirt untucked and his eyes glazed with alcohol and reckless abandon. "Tell me about Marcus," he said quietly. "When did you last speak with him?" The question seemed innocent enough, and Camilla's face brightened. "Just last week, actually. He called to thank me for the recommendation I gave him for that investment opportunity." He's doing so well, Charles. Finally, found his footing after those difficult years in his 20s. Her pride in her nephew was evident in every word, making what Charles had to reveal even more painful. And, what did he tell you about his current financial situation? Charles pressed, watching her carefully. He needed to understand how deeply her family's deception ran, whether Camilla herself had any knowledge of the brewing scandal. Camilla tilted her head, confused by the line of questioning. He mentioned that his ventures were paying off handsomely. Said he was finally able to provide the lifestyle his family deserved. Why these questions, Charles? Has something happened? The king slid the first photograph across the desk. Camilla's eyes widened as she recognized her nephew, but confusion rather than recognition filled her expression. This doesn't look like Marcus, she said slowly. I mean, it is him, but he looks so different. When was this taken? 3 days ago, Charles replied. In Monaco. At 4 in the morning. He watched as understanding began to dawn on his wife's face, the color slowly draining from her cheeks. There must be some explanation, she whispered, picking up the photograph with shaking hands. Perhaps he was there on business, or maybe these women are business associates. Marcus wouldn't, he's married, Charles. He loves his family. Charles slid the next document across the desk. Bank statements showing Marcus's mounting debts, credit reports revealing maxed out cards and defaulted loans, and, finally, the intercepted communications that detailed his plan to sell royal family secrets. With each revelation, Camilla's composure crumbled further. The security services believe he's been planning this for months, Charles explained gently. Recording conversations, taking photographs during family gatherings, documenting private moments that he believes will be valuable to tabloid editors. He paused, allowing the weight of the betrayal to sink in. Camilla, he's been using our trust, using your love for him, as a weapon against the crown. The queen consort sat in stunned silence, the documents scattered across her lap like evidence of a crime she couldn't comprehend. Her nephew, the boy she had helped raise after his father's early death, the young man she had guided through university and early career struggles, was planning to destroy her family for money. What else do they know? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles hesitated before revealing the most damaging intelligence. They have recordings, Camilla. Conversations from last Christmas, from William's birthday celebration, from private family dinners. Moments where we spoke freely, believing we were surrounded only by those who loved us. He leaned forward, taking her hand. The damage he could do isn't just to our reputation. It could undermine the monarchy itself. The reality of the situation was beginning to crystallize in Camilla's mind. Her nephew possessed intimate knowledge of royal family dynamics, personal struggles, private disagreements, and vulnerable moments that the public had never seen. In the wrong hands, this information could fuel years of tabloid stories, each one chipping away at the dignity and mystique that the monarchy required to function effectively. What do we do? She asked, looking up at her husband with eyes full of pain and confusion. He's family, Charles. Despite what he's planning, he's still family. There must be a way to reach him, to make him understand what he's throwing away. Charles had been dreading this moment since Sir Clive first briefed him on the situation. The intelligence reports didn't just recommend monitoring Marcus Parker Bowles, they recommended complete severance. No contact, no access, no opportunity for him to gather more damaging material. The security of the crown demanded nothing less than total exile from the royal circle. The Security Council has made their recommendation, he said slowly. They want a complete ban on all of your extended family members who have been in contact with Marcus. Anyone who might have been compromised, anyone who might be leveraged for information, anyone who poses a potential security risk. Camilla's face went white. All of them? Charles, that would include my sister, my cousins, my nieces and nephews. People who have done nothing wrong, people who have been nothing but loyal and discreet. Her voice rose slightly, the first hint of the emotional storm that was building inside her. The risk is too great, Charles explained, hating every word he was forced to say. We can't know who else might be involved, who else might have been compromised or tempted by Marcus's plans. The security of the monarchy must take precedence over personal relationships. The king watched as his wife processed the full scope of what he was telling her. It wasn't just about Marcus anymore. It was about cutting ties with an entire branch of her family tree, people who had been part of their lives for decades, people who had celebrated their marriage and supported their journey from scandalous affair to respected royal couple. When, she asked, her voice hollow. The order will be issued this afternoon, Charles replied. Security personnel will inform each family member that their access to royal residences and events has been permanently revoked. They'll be required to sign additional non-disclosure agreements, and any future contact will be strictly prohibited. Camilla stood slowly from her chair, the documents falling to the floor like autumn leaves. She walked to the window where Charles had been standing earlier, looking out at the same pristine gardens, but seeing something entirely different. She was watching her old life, the life where family loyalty and royal duty could coexist, disappear before her eyes. "They'll hate me," she said quietly. "My own family will believe I chose the crown over them. They'll never understand that it wasn't my choice to make." She turned back to face her husband, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "And perhaps they'll be right to hate me. Perhaps I should have seen the warning signs, should have known that Marcus was struggling." Charles rose and moved to stand beside her at the window. "You couldn't have known, my dear. You loved him, trusted him, believed the best of him. Those aren't weaknesses, they're the qualities that make you the remarkable woman you are. But being queen consort means making impossible choices, means sacrificing personal happiness for the greater good. Will you tell them, or will you make me do it?" Camilla asked, her composure finally beginning to crack. "I'll handle the official communications," Charles assured her. "But, I think you should speak with your sister yourself. And deserves to hear this from you, not from palace security." The thought of calling her sister, of explaining why decades of family bonds were being severed for the actions of one reckless nephew, was almost too much to bear. And had been Camilla's closest confidant through the difficult years when their relationship was public scandal. She had defended Camilla against critics, supported her through the transition to royal life, and celebrated every milestone in their unconventional love story. What if she refuses to accept it? Camilla asked. What if she demands to see you, demands an explanation, demands that we reconsider? Then, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Charles replied. But, Camilla, you must understand that this decision is final. The security of the crown cannot be compromised, not even for family, not even for love. As if summoned by their conversation, Sir Clive Alderton knocked softly and entered the study. His expression was grave as he approached the royal couple. Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, I'm afraid there's been a development. Our sources indicate that Marcus Parker Bowles has scheduled a meeting with a representative from a major tabloid for tomorrow evening. The security window is closing rapidly. Charles felt Camilla's body tense beside him. The abstract threat was becoming immediate reality. Within 24 hours, intimate royal family secrets could be splashed across front pages around the world. The damage would be irreversible, the trust between the monarchy and the British people potentially shattered beyond repair. Issue the orders immediately, Charles commanded. I want every member of the Parker Bowles extended family informed within the next 2 hours. Security sweeps of all royal residences to remove any personal items they may have left behind. Full media monitoring activated to track any leaks or stories that might surface. Sir Clive nodded and departed, leaving the royal couple alone with the weight of their decision. Camilla returned to her chair, suddenly, looking every one of her 76 years. The vibrant woman who had entered the study with morning tea had been replaced by someone Charles barely recognized, a queen consort bearing the full burden of her impossible position. I need to call in, she said finally. I need to do it now, before the security teams arrive at her door. She looked up at Charles with eyes that held a mixture of love and accusation. After I make this call, after I destroy my relationship with my own sister to protect your crown, I hope you'll remember that some prices are too high to pay, even for kings. Charles watched his wife leave the study, her shoulders squared with determination despite the devastation in her eyes. Through the window, he could see palace guards beginning their increased patrols, security cameras being adjusted for better coverage, and staff members hurrying between buildings with the urgency that marked a crisis in motion. The morning mist had lifted, revealing a crystal-clear autumn day. But, inside the palace walls, a different kind of storm was just beginning. By evening, the Parker Bowles family would be exiled from royal life forever, Camilla would be estranged from the sister who had stood by her through every scandal, and King Charles would have demonstrated once again that when duty calls, even love must step aside. The crown was secure, but at what cost? As Charles stood alone in his study, surrounded by the evidence of betrayal and the debris of broken trust, he wondered if some victories were actually defeats in disguise. The hardest decisions were yet to come, and the most difficult conversation of his marriage was only hours away. Camilla's hands trembled as she dialed her sister Anne's number from the secure phone in her private sitting room. The familiar space, decorated with photographs of family gatherings and cherished memories, suddenly felt like a museum of a life that was about to end. Each image seemed to mock her now, Marcus grinning at Christmas dinner and embracing her at the coronation, family picnics where everyone looked so happy and innocent. The phone rang 3 times before Anne's warm voice answered. "Darling! What a lovely surprise! I was just thinking about you and wondering how you're settling into all the state visit preparations. The Australian trip is going to be magnificent." Camilla closed her eyes, savoring what might be the last normal conversation she would ever have with her sister. "Anne, I need you to sit down. What I'm about to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." The tone shift was immediate. And Parker Bowles had known her sister for nearly 7 decades, and she recognized the voice of someone delivering devastating news. "What's happened? Is Charles all right? Are you ill?" "We're both fine, physically," Camilla began, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her heart. "But something has happened that's going to change everything for our family. And Marcus has been gambling heavily. He owes nearly £2 million to some very dangerous people." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for several seconds. "Marcus? Our Marcus? That's impossible, Camilla. I had lunch with him just last week. He was talking about expanding his business, about finally being able to send the children to better schools. He seemed so confident, so successful." "That's what he wanted us all to believe," Camilla replied, opening the folder Charles had left with her. Even looking at the photographs again made her stomach turn. The palace security services have been monitoring the situation. They have evidence that he's been living a double life, gambling, drinking, associating with women who aren't his wife, and, most devastatingly, planning to sell stories about the royal family to tabloid newspapers. The gasp from Anne was audible even through the phone. "Sell stories? What kind of stories? Camilla, what could he possibly know that would be worth anything to those vultures?" This was the part Camilla had been dreading most. "Everything, Anne. He's been recording family conversations, taking photographs during private moments, documenting personal details from every family gathering he's attended over the past 2 years. Christmas dinner, William's birthday, private conversations about the grandchildren. He's been treating our family like a business opportunity." Anne's voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. "The boy I held when he was a baby? The child who cried in my arms when his father died? The young man we all rallied around when he was struggling to find his way? That Marcus is planning to betray us all for money?" The security services intercepted communications showing he has a meeting scheduled with a major tabloid tomorrow evening. "And the damage he could do isn't just to Charles and me. He knows intimate details about William and Catherine, about the grandchildren, about private struggles and family dynamics that the public has never seen. He could fuel years of damaging stories." Camilla could hear her sister moving around, likely pacing the way she always did when processing difficult information. "What does Charles want to do about it? Surely we can reach Marcus, make him understand what he's throwing away. Family has to mean something, doesn't it?" This was the moment Camilla had been dreading since she walked out of Charles's study. "Charles has made a decision, Anne. Based on the Security Council's recommendations, he's issuing a permanent ban on all extended family members who might have been compromised or who pose a potential security risk.
What does that mean, exactly? It means you, Anne.
It means all of our cousins, our nieces and nephews, anyone who's been in contact with Marcus or who might have access to sensitive information. You're all being banned from royal residences, from family events, from any contact with the royal family.
Permanently.
The silence that followed was deafening. Camilla could picture her sister's face, the same expression she'd worn as a child when their parents had delivered particularly harsh punishments.
Confusion, hurt, and growing anger all rolled into one devastating realization. You're cutting us off, Anne said finally.
Your own family. People who have loved and supported you through everything, the divorce, the scandals, the years when half of Britain thought you were a home-wrecking monster.
We stood by you, Camilla. We defended you when no one else would.
I know, Camilla whispered, tears beginning to flow down her cheeks. And you have to understand that this isn't my choice. If it were up to me, I would handle this quietly, privately, as a family matter.
But I'm not just your sister anymore.
I'm Queen Consort, and the security of the crown has to come first. The security of the crown, Anne repeated, her voice growing cold.
And what about the security of family bonds that have lasted a lifetime? What about loyalty that doesn't come with conditions attached? What about love that's supposed to survive even the worst betrayals?
Camilla felt as if her heart was being torn in two. Everything her sister was saying was true, but the weight of her royal obligations made compromise impossible.
And if there were any other way, any possibility of containing this without such drastic measures, don't you think I would take it? Do you think I want to lose my family to protect my position?
I think, and said slowly, that you've been wearing that crown so long that you've forgotten who you were before you put it on. The sister I knew would never sacrifice family for politics, no matter what the cost. The accusation hit Camilla like a physical blow.
Was Anne right? Had she become so consumed with her royal role that she'd lost sight of the values that once defined her? Or was she simply facing the reality that being queen consort meant making choices that would have been unthinkable in her previous life?
That's not fair, Camilla said, her voice growing stronger. You have no idea what it's like to live under this kind of scrutiny, to know that every decision you make affects not just your family but an entire nation. The monarchy isn't just about fancy hats and state dinners, Anne.
It's about preserving an institution that's older than our country's democracy. And our family? Our bonds? The love that sustained us through everything life has thrown our way? What's that worth in your grand institutional calculations?
Before Camilla could respond, she heard voices in the background of Anne's call. Her sister's husband and children were arriving home unaware that their world was about to be turned upside down. And you need to prepare them.
The security teams will be arriving soon to inform everyone officially. I wanted you to hear this from me first, but the implementation is immediate. Security teams? Anne's voice rose in disbelief. You're sending security teams to my home? To deliver the news that I'm no longer welcome in my own sister's life? Camilla, do you hear yourself? Do you understand how utterly cold and bureaucratic you sound?
Camilla could hear her sister beginning to cry, and the sound was unbearable. And had been her rock through every difficult period of her life. When Camilla's first marriage fell apart, and had provided a shoulder to cry on and practical support. When the affair with Charles became public, and had defended her against critics and stood by her when friends disappeared. When Camilla struggled with the transition to royal life, and had been patient with the increased security and decreased availability, never complaining about the restrictions that came with having a sister in the royal family. I need you to know, Camilla said through her own tears, that I will never stop loving you. I will never stop considering you my sister, my closest friend, my most trusted confidant. This ban, this separation, it's not about my feelings for you. It's about circumstances that are bigger than both of us. Then, fight it, and pleaded. Tell Charles that family loyalty matters more than political calculations. Remind him that you gave up everything to be with him, and the least he can do is find a solution that doesn't require you to give up your family too. Camilla thought about the conversation in Charles's study, the weight of responsibility she'd seen in his eyes, the impossible position they were both in.
And you don't understand the pressure Charles is under. The monarchy is under constant scrutiny, constant threat. Every scandal weakens the institution, and a betrayal from within our own family circle could be devastating. So you choose him over us, and said flatly. After everything we've been through together, you choose your crown over your blood.
I choose duty over personal preference, Camilla replied, hating how formal she sounded even as she said it. I choose the greater good over individual desires. It's what being queen consort means, Anne. It's the sacrifice I made when I accepted this role. Then, I hope it's worth it, Anne said, her voice bitter with disappointment. I hope when you're sitting in your palace, surrounded by your protocol and your security teams and your precious institutional dignity, you remember what you gave up to get there. I hope you remember that some things, once broken, can never be repaired. The line went dead, leaving Camilla staring at the phone in her hand as if it had personally betrayed her. The silence in her sitting room was oppressive, broken only by the ticking of an antique clock that had been a wedding gift from Anne and her husband. The irony wasn't lost on her, even her most personal space was filled with reminders of the family she was being forced to abandon. A soft knock on the door interrupted her grief. Come in, she called, hastily wiping her tears and trying to compose herself for whatever crisis required her attention next. It was Charles, looking as devastated as she felt. How did it go? He asked gently, settling into the chair across from her sofa. About as well as you'd expect, Camilla replied, her voice hollow. She thinks I've chosen the crown over family. She thinks I've forgotten who I was before I became queen consort. She may be right. Charles leaned forward, taking her hands in his. My darling, you haven't forgotten anything. You've simply grown into a role that demands impossible choices. Every monarch, every royal consort in history has faced moments like this, moments when personal happiness must be sacrificed for the greater good. Have they? Camilla asked, looking into her husband's eyes. Or is that just something we tell ourselves to justify the unjustifiable? Charles, I just lost my sister. Not to death or distance or natural drift, but to a calculated political decision. How many more pieces of my soul am I expected to surrender for this institution? The king was quiet for a long moment, considering her question. Perhaps too many, he admitted finally. But, Camilla, the alternative is worse. If we allow personal relationships to compromise the security of the crown, if we let family loyalty override institutional duty, the monarchy becomes vulnerable in ways that could destroy it entirely. And if we become so isolated, so removed from normal human bonds that we forget what we're supposed to be protecting, what good is the institution anyway? Camilla countered. What's the point of preserving the monarchy if the people who represent it become unrecognizable as human beings? Before Charles could respond, Sir Clive Alderton knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a breach of protocol that indicated emergency urgency. Your Majesties, I'm afraid there's been a complication. And Parker Bowles has called several other family members to warn them about the impending security visits. The situation is escalating rapidly. Camilla felt her heart sink even further. Of course, Anne had called the others, it was exactly what she would have done herself in the same situation. Family protected family, even when that protection came too late to prevent disaster. What kind of escalation? Charles asked, his voice tense. Your cousin Margaret is demanding an immediate audience with your Majesty. Your nephew David is threatening to call the press himself if he's not given a proper explanation. And has retained a solicitor to challenge the legal basis for the banning order. Sir Clive paused, clearly uncomfortable with his next revelation. She's also posted a message on her social media accounts indicating that she's been abandoned by family for political reasons. Camilla closed her eyes in despair. The careful management of the situation was unraveling in real time, and her family's pain was about to become public spectacle. The very thing they had hoped to prevent, damaging publicity about royal family dynamics, was happening anyway, but now it was coming from the victims rather than the perpetrator. Delete the social media posts if possible, Charles ordered. Arrange meetings with Margaret and David for this afternoon. And get our legal team to review any challenge Anne's solicitor might mount.
He looked at Camilla with deep concern.
My dear, I'm afraid this is going to get much worse before it gets better.
How much worse can it get? Camilla asked wearily.
I've already lost my sister, I'm about to lose the rest of my family, and now they're going to fight back publicly. The scandal we were trying to prevent is happening anyway, just from a different direction. Sir Clive cleared his throat uncomfortably.
There's one more thing, Your Majesty.
Marcus Parker Bowles has apparently been informed about the family bans through his contacts with the others. Our sources indicate he's moved up his meeting with the tabloid to this evening. He's telling them he has an even bigger story now, not just royal secrets, but evidence of how the royal family treats its own relatives when they become inconvenient.
The room fell silent as the full implications of this development sank in.
Not only would Marcus be selling intimate royal family secrets, but he would be framing the story as evidence of royal cruelty and coldness. The narrative would be devastating. King Charles was so heartless that he would destroy his wife's family rather than show mercy to a troubled nephew. Camilla stood slowly, moving to the window where she could see the palace gardens where she had walked so many times with Charles, where they had planned their future together, where they had believed love could conquer any obstacle. We've played right into his hands, she said quietly. Marcus gets to be both the victim and the villain. He gets to sell his secrets and position himself as someone who was driven to it by royal cruelty. There was no good choice, Charles said, joining her at the window. If we had done nothing, he would have sold the secrets anyway, and we would have looked weak and unprepared. If we ban the family quietly, he exposes the two and makes it look like a cover-up. If we ban them publicly, we look heartless.
Every option leads to damage.
Then, why, Camilla asked, turning to face her husband with tears in her eyes, did we choose the option that guaranteed I would lose my family?
If every path leads to scandal anyway, why couldn't we have chosen the path that left my relationships intact?
Charles had no answer for her, because deep down, he was beginning to wonder the same thing. The certainty he had felt that morning, the clarity about duty and institutional necessity, was being eroded by the reality of watching his beloved wife's world fall apart around her. The crown was supposed to elevate those who wore it, not strip them of everything that made life worth living.
As if summoned by their despair, another knock came at the door.
This time it was a junior aide, looking terrified to interrupt the royal couple but carrying news that couldn't wait. Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, I've been instructed to inform you that the first tabloid story has just been published online. The headline reads, Heartless King Destroys Queen's Family to Hide Royal Scandals. Camilla felt the world spinning around her as she realized that everything she had feared was coming to pass. Her family was destroyed, her relationship with him was over, and now the entire country would see her as either a victim of her husband's cruelty or a willing participant in the destruction of family bonds. There was no version of this story that would leave her dignity intact. I need to lie down, she said faintly, suddenly, feeling as if the weight of her crown was literally crushing her skull. Charles, I need to be alone for a while. I need to process what we've done and what it means for our future. As Camilla left the room, Charles remained at the window, watching the autumn leaves fall from the ancient trees that had witnessed centuries of royal triumphs and disasters. He wondered if this moment would be remembered as the day when duty finally demanded too high a price, when the institution they were trying to protect began to devour the very people who served it most faithfully. The storm was far from over, and the hardest conversations were yet to come. The palace press office had never experienced anything quite like the media frenzy that erupted within hours of the first tabloid story hitting the internet. Communications Director Sarah Mitchell found herself fielding calls from news organizations across the globe, each one demanding comment on what was rapidly being dubbed the Great Royal Purge. By mid-afternoon, television news channels were running continuous coverage with breaking news banners and expert panels dissecting every angle of the story. King Charles sat in the secure briefing room deep within Buckingham Palace, surrounded by his most trusted advisors and watching the coverage on multiple screens. The images were devastating, archive footage of happy family gatherings juxtaposed with stark headlines about royal cruelty, photographs of Camilla smiling with her relatives contrasted with quotes from unnamed sources describing her heartbreak and isolation. The narrative is completely out of our control, Sarah Mitchell reported grimly.
Marcus Parker Bowles gave a 2-hour interview that will air tonight on the main evening news program.
The advance clips show him crying, talking about how the royal family has abandoned and destroyed people who love them unconditionally.
He's positioned himself as the victim of royal paranoia and excessive security measures.
Sir Clive Alderton looked up from his tablet, where he was monitoring social media reactions.
The public response is overwhelmingly negative. The hashtag #RoyalHeartless is trending worldwide.
People are sharing stories about their own family loyalties, contrasting them with what they see as the monarchy's cold calculation. The Australian state visit is being questioned, there are calls for it to be cancelled or postponed. Charles felt each piece of news like a physical blow. Everything they had worked to build during his reign, the image of a modern, compassionate monarchy in touch with the people's values, was crumbling in real time.
What are Anne's statements doing to the narrative?
She's given a measured interview to the BBC, Sarah replied. Very dignified, very hurt, but not attacking you or Her Majesty directly. She's talking about family bonds, about standing by people through their mistakes, about the difference between public duty and private loyalty. It's actually making the situation worse because she sounds so reasonable and sympathetic.
The irony was crushing.
Anne's grace under pressure, her refusal to attack the royal family even while defending her position, was making the monarchy look even more heartless by comparison. If she had been angry or vindictive, the public might have sympathized with the difficult position the royal couple faced. Instead, her dignity highlighted the apparent cruelty of the decision to ban her.
Where is Her Majesty?
Charles asked, suddenly, realizing he hadn't seen Camilla in several hours. In her private chambers, Sir Clive replied carefully.
She's asked not to be disturbed unless there's an emergency.
Her personal staff report that she's not taking calls or meals. She's requested that all media monitoring be stopped in her presence. Charles felt a chill of fear. He knew his wife well enough to recognize the signs of someone retreating into emotional shutdown. Camilla had always been resilient, always able to weather public criticism and personal attacks, but this was different. This wasn't strangers criticizing her choices, this was her own family being forced to choose between their loyalty to her and their loyalty to each other. I need to speak with her, Charles decided, standing from his chair. Continue monitoring the situation, prepare response options, but don't release any statements without my approval. We need to understand the full scope of this before we react. The walk to Camilla's private chambers felt longer than usual, each step weighed down by the knowledge that his decision was destroying the woman he loved. The guard stationed outside her door reported that she had been silent for the past 2 hours, refusing even to acknowledge her personal staff's attempts to bring her tea or check on her welfare. Charles knocked softly on the door.
My darling, it's me. May I come in?
The silence stretched for so long that he began to worry something was seriously wrong. Finally, Camilla's voice came through the door, barely audible.
I'm not sure I want to see anyone right now, Charles. I'm not sure I want to be seen. Please, my love. We need to talk about what's happening, about what we're going to do next.
He paused, pressing his hand against the door as if he could reach her through the solid wood.
I can't bear this distance between us.
Not now, when we need each other most. The door opened slowly, revealing Camilla in a way Charles had never seen her before. She was still wearing the blue dress from that morning, but it was wrinkled and disheveled. Her usually perfectly styled hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her eyes were red with tears that seemed to have been falling for hours. Most shocking of all, she had removed all her jewelry, her wedding ring, her royal orders, even the simple pearl earrings she almost never took off. I've been watching the news, she said quietly, stepping back to let him enter. I know I asked them to turn off the monitors, but I couldn't help myself. I needed to see what the world thinks of us now, what they think of me. The sitting room was dark, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun, and the usual warmth of Camilla's personal space felt oppressive and tomb-like. She moved to her favorite chair but didn't sit down, instead standing behind it as if it could provide some barrier between herself and her husband. What they think doesn't matter, Charles said, though even as he spoke the words, he knew they weren't entirely true. Public opinion had always mattered to the monarchy, it was the foundation of their legitimacy and their ability to serve effectively.
Doesn't it? Camilla asked, her voice flat with exhaustion.
Because from what I've seen, they think I'm either a weak woman who allowed her husband to destroy her family, or a cold queen who valued her crown more than her sister's love. Either way, I'd become everything I swore I would never be when I married you. Charles moved closer, wanting to comfort her but sensing she wasn't ready for physical contact.
You're neither of those things, and, deep down, you know it.
You're a woman who was forced to make an impossible choice between two sets of obligations, both of which were valid and important.
Am I?
Camilla turned to face him directly for the first time since he'd entered the room. Because I keep replaying the conversation with and keep thinking about other ways we could have handled this, other approaches we could have taken.
What if we had confronted Marcus privately first? What if we had offered to help with his debts in exchange for his silence? What if we had trusted family loyalty over security protocols?
And, if any of those approaches had failed, if Marcus had taken our attempts at family intervention as weakness and used them against us, the damage would have been even worse, Charles replied. We would have looked naive and unprepared, and the stories he could tell would have been even more damaging. Camilla sat down heavily in her chair, suddenly, looking every one of her 76 years. So we chose the approach that guaranteed maximum damage to my personal relationships in order to minimize potential damage to the institution. We sacrificed certainty of personal loss for uncertainty of political gain. The way she phrased it made Charles uncomfortable because it highlighted the cold calculation behind their decision. We chose the approach that protected the most people from the most serious harm. Marcus's betrayal could have damaged not just us, but William and Catherine, the grandchildren, the entire institution that millions of people depend on for stability and continuity.
And my family? My sister who raised me when our parents died young? My nieces and nephews who have been nothing but loyal and discreet? The cousins who defended me during the worst years of public criticism? What about the harm we've done to them?
Camilla's voice was rising, the first sign of real emotion she'd shown since the crisis began.
Charles didn't have a good answer because there wasn't one.
The mathematics of monarchy were brutal. Sometimes good people got hurt in service of the greater good, sometimes personal happiness had to be sacrificed for public duty, sometimes love wasn't enough to overcome the demands of the crown. I've been thinking, Camilla continued, about the woman I was before I met you. She had flaws, certainly, but she would never have chosen institutional loyalty over family bonds. She would have found a way to protect both, or she would have refused to make the choice at all. That woman also didn't have the responsibilities you carry now, Charles pointed out gently. She didn't have to consider the welfare of an entire nation, the stability of a constitutional system, the security of an institution that provides continuity through political changes and social upheavals.
No, Camilla agreed, she didn't.
But she also slept peacefully at night, knowing that her conscience was clear and her relationships were intact.
Can the same be said for the woman I've become?
Before Charles could respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sir Clive's voice came through urgently. Your Majesty, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but there's been a significant development that requires immediate attention. Charles opened the door to find Sir Clive looking more distressed than he had ever seen him.
What is it?
Marcus Parker Bowles has collapsed during his television interview. He's been taken to hospital with what appears to be a heart attack or severe anxiety episode.
The footage of him breaking down, crying about family loyalty and royal cruelty, is already being replayed on every news channel.
The narrative has shifted from troubled nephew sells secrets to royal family drives man to physical collapse. Camilla had been listening from her chair, and the news seemed to drain what little color remained from her face.
Is he going to be all right? She asked quietly.
The doctors aren't certain, Sir Clive replied. He's stable but serious. His wife is with him, and she's given a statement saying that the stress of being abandoned by family contributed to his condition. He paused uncomfortably. There are already calls for Your Majesty to visit him in hospital, to make some gesture of reconciliation.
Absolutely not, Charles said immediately. That would be admitting fault, suggesting that our security measures were wrong. It would compromise everything we've tried to accomplish.
Camilla stood slowly, steadying herself against the back of her chair.
He's in the hospital, Charles.
Whatever he's done, whatever damage he planned to cause, he's still my nephew. He's still a young man who made terrible mistakes and is now paying a terrible price. He's also someone who was prepared to destroy our marriage, our family, and the monarchy itself for money, Charles reminded her. Camilla, I understand your compassion, but we cannot allow sentiment to override security considerations. Any sign of weakness now will encourage others to test our resolve. Others, Camilla repeated slowly.
You mean other members of my family? Other people who love me and might be tempted to express that love in ways that threaten your precious institution? The accusation hung in the air between them like a poison cloud.
Charles realized that he was losing not just the public relations battle, but the much more important battle for his wife's trust and partnership. The institution he was fighting so hard to protect was consuming the relationship that gave his life meaning. That's not what I meant, he said carefully, but, Camilla, we have to consider all possibilities. The monarchy survives by being prepared for threats, by maintaining clear boundaries, by never appearing vulnerable to manipulation or blackmail.
And what about surviving by being human? Camilla asked. What about maintaining the trust and love of the people who serve it? What about remembering that institutions are only as strong as the human bonds that sustain them?
Sir Clive cleared his throat uncomfortably, clearly unwilling to interrupt what was becoming a marital argument but forced to by the urgency of events.
Your Majesty, there's more.
And Parker Bowles has announced that she's going to visit Marcus in the hospital. The media will be there in force, and her statement will likely be seen as a rebuke to the royal family's absence.
Camilla moved to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out at the gathering dusk.
So my sister will be there for my nephew in his moment of crisis, while I sit in my palace, prevented by protocol and security concerns from showing basic human compassion.
The contrast will be noted by everyone watching.
The contrast will also show the difference between private individuals and public figures, Charles argued. And can afford grand gestures because she doesn't carry the weight of the crown. Her actions affect only herself and her immediate family.
Your actions represent the monarchy itself. Do they?
Camilla turned from the window with a strange expression on her face.
Because I'm beginning to wonder if the monarchy I represent is worth representing.
If being queen consort means becoming someone I don't recognize, someone who values political calculation over human decency, then, perhaps the institution itself is the problem. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock. Sir Clive looked as if he wanted to disappear entirely, caught between his duty to provide information and his awareness that he was witnessing the potential dissolution of a royal marriage. You don't mean that, Charles said finally, his voice barely above a whisper.
Don't I? Camilla asked.
Charles, in the space of one day, I've lost my sister, been forced to abandon my nephew in his moment of greatest need, and discovered that the institution I've served faithfully considers my family a security threat.
At what point do the costs outweigh the benefits? At what point does duty become destruction?
The king felt the ground shifting beneath his feet as he realized that the crisis had moved beyond questions of public relations or family management. His wife, his partner, his closest advisor, his emotional anchor, was questioning not just his decisions but the entire foundation of their shared life. We can work through this, he said desperately. When the immediate crisis passes, when emotions cool and perspectives clear, we can find ways to rebuild the bridges that have been damaged.
Family wounds heal, Camilla. Time and understanding can repair almost anything.
Can they? She asked, settling back into her chair with the weariness of someone who had aged years in a single day.
Because I don't think Anne will ever forgive me for choosing the crown over family loyalty.
I don't think Marcus, if he recovers, will ever forgive the royal family for driving him to a hospital bed.
And I'm not certain I'll ever forgive myself for becoming someone I don't recognize.
Outside, the sound of increased security patrols could be heard as the palace prepared for what would likely be a long night of media coverage and public scrutiny. The storm that had begun with a single nephew's gambling debts had evolved into something much more dangerous, a crisis of identity and purpose that threatened not just the monarchy's reputation, but the marriage that had become its emotional center. Charles stood in the gathering darkness of his wife's sitting room, surrounded by the artifacts of their shared life, and wondered if some decisions were so destructive that they poisoned everything they were meant to protect. the hardest part of being king, he was learning, wasn't making difficult decisions, it was living with the consequences when those decisions destroyed the very things that made life worth living. The emergency cabinet meeting convened at 8 in the evening, with Prime Minister Helena Richardson arriving at Buckingham Palace through the back entrance to avoid the growing crowd of protesters and media outside the main gates. The situation had deteriorated throughout the day, with public opinion polls showing a dramatic drop in support for the monarchy and calls from several members of parliament for a review of royal security protocols. King Charles entered the secure conference room to find his most trusted advisors arranged around the mahogany table like mourners at a funeral. The weight of their collective concern was palpable, and, for the first time in his reign, he sensed something he had never felt before: doubt about his leadership from those who had always stood firmly behind him. The Australian Prime Minister has called twice today. Prime Minister Richardson began without preamble. There are serious questions about whether the state visit should proceed as planned. The optics of celebrating the monarchy while this family crisis dominates headlines would be problematic. She paused, consulting her notes. Additionally, 3 major Commonwealth nations have requested clarification about royal family security protocols and their potential impact on future diplomatic relations. Archbishop of Canterbury Michael Foster leaned forward, his expression grave. Your Majesty, I've received calls from religious leaders across the country expressing concern about the moral implications of this situation. The Church's position on family forgiveness and compassion is being contrasted unfavorably with the Crown's actions. This is becoming a crisis of moral authority as well as political legitimacy. Charles felt each report like stones being piled on his chest, making it harder to breathe. What is the current status of public opinion? Communications Director Sarah Mitchell consulted her tablet with obvious reluctance. The latest polling shows approval ratings for the monarchy at the lowest point since the immediate aftermath of Princess Diana's death. Support for Your Majesty personally has dropped 23 points in 12 hours. Most concerning, approval for Queen Consort Camilla has fallen even more dramatically. She's now viewed negatively by 68% of respondents. The number hit Charles like a physical blow. Camilla had worked for decades to earn public acceptance and affection, slowly building trust through charitable work, dignified behavior, and genuine warmth in public appearances. To see that goodwill evaporate overnight because of his decision was almost unbearable. There's more, Sarah continued reluctantly. Social media analysis shows that the narrative has expanded beyond just the family banning situation. People are questioning whether the monarchy has become too removed from ordinary human values, too focused on institutional protection at the expense of basic decency. The conversation is shifting toward fundamental questions about the relevance and moral authority of the crown in modern Britain. Sir Clive Alderton spoke up from his position at the end of the table. Marcus Parker Bowles remains in stable condition, but his doctors have indicated that stress was definitely a contributing factor to his collapse. His wife has given another interview describing the heartless abandonment by the royal family. And Parker Bowles has been photographed holding vigil at the hospital, and her dignity in the face of royal rejection is being widely praised. Charles closed his eyes, trying to block out the image of his wife's sister sitting alone beside her nephew's hospital bed while he remained locked away in palace meetings, discussing damage control strategies instead of showing basic human compassion. The symbolism was devastating, and, worse, it was accurate. He was prioritizing institutional protection over human decency, exactly as his critics claimed. What are our options? He asked wearily. Prime Minister Richardson exchanged glances with the Archbishop before responding. Realistically, Your Majesty, there are 3 possible approaches. First, we could maintain the current position, weather the storm, and hope that public attention moves on to other issues. Second, we could make partial concessions, perhaps allowing some family members to return while maintaining the ban on others. Third. She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with what she was about to say. Third? Charles prompted. Third, we could consider a full reversal of the banning order, coupled with a public statement acknowledging that the response was disproportionate to the threat. It would be seen as admitting error, which has obvious political costs, but it might be the only way to contain the damage to the monarchy's moral authority. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Reversing the decision would mean admitting that the Security Council's recommendations were wrong, that Charles's judgment was flawed, that the entire crisis had been unnecessary. It would also mean returning to the original problem, Marcus Parker Bowles and his plans to sell royal secrets, without any clear solution.
Has anyone attempted to reach out to Marcus directly?
Charles asked.
To understand what his actual intentions were, whether there might have been alternatives to such drastic action? Sir Clive consulted his notes. Actually, yes.
Our security team interviewed his wife at the hospital this afternoon. She claims that Marcus was never planning to sell damaging stories about the core royal family. According to her, his plans involved selling general information about royal lifestyle and protocols, the kind of material that generates tabloid interest but doesn't actually compromise security or reveal intimate family secrets. Charles felt the floor shifting beneath him as the implications became clear.
Are you telling me that we destroyed Camilla's family relationships over lifestyle gossip rather than genuine security threats?
The intelligence was, perhaps, interpreted with excessive caution, Sir Clive admitted reluctantly. The security services were operating under Post 9/11 protocols that assume maximum threat levels. In retrospect, the actual risk may have been significantly less than originally assessed.
The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this revelation.
The entire crisis, the destroyed relationships, the public relations disaster, the damage to Camilla's emotional well-being, all of it might have been unnecessary, based on an overly paranoid interpretation of incomplete intelligence. Charles stood slowly from his chair, needing to move, needing to process what he was hearing. So my wife has lost her family, her nephew is in the hospital, and the monarchy is facing its worst crisis in decades, all because we treated celebrity gossip as national security threats? The decision was made with the information available at the time, Prime Minister Richardson said carefully.
No one could have predicted that the response would generate more damaging publicity than the original threat. Could they not?
Archbishop Foster interjected quietly. Because it seems to me that anyone with basic understanding of human nature could have predicted that banning an entire family would generate precisely this kind of response. The surprise isn't that this has exploded publicly, the surprise is that anyone thought it could be handled quietly. Charles felt anger building inside him, not at his advisors but at himself, at the system that had encouraged him to prioritize institutional protection over human wisdom.
Where is the Queen Consort now?
Still in her private chambers, Sir Clive replied. She's refused all meals and declined to see anyone except her personal dresser. Her Majesty's private secretary reports that she's been making phone calls, but won't say to whom. A chill of fear ran through Charles. Camilla making mysterious phone calls while in emotional crisis could mean anything: attempts to reach her family, conversations with her legal advisors, or worse, discussions with media representatives about her own response to the situation. I need to speak with her immediately, Charles decided. Continue monitoring the situation, but don't make any public statements until I've had a chance to discuss this with my wife. Nothing, and I mean nothing, gets released without both our approvals.
The walk back to Camilla's chambers felt like a death march. Charles's mind raced through possible scenarios, each one worse than the last. What if she was planning to leave him? What if she was considering her own public statement distancing herself from his decisions? What if the phone calls were to divorce attorneys or palace staff members she was trying to influence?
The guards outside her door reported that she had been quiet for the past hour, and that the mysterious phone calls had ended around 7 o'clock. Charles knocked softly, his heart pounding with anxiety about what he might find.
Camilla, my love, it's me again. I have some information about the situation that I need to share with you. May I please come in?
This time the door opened immediately, revealing a transformed scene. Camilla was no longer in her wrinkled dress from the morning. She had changed into an elegant black evening gown and had clearly spent time fixing her hair and makeup. Her jewelry was back in place, including her wedding ring, and she stood with the posture and bearing of a queen consort rather than a devastated wife. Charles, she said formally, I've been waiting for you.
Please, sit down.
We need to have a very serious conversation about our future. The formality in her voice terrified him more than her earlier tears had. This was not his emotional, vulnerable wife seeking comfort. This was Queen Consort Camilla in full royal mode, preparing to make pronouncements that could change everything. Before you say anything, Charles began, I need you to know that we've learned more about Marcus's actual plans. The security assessment may have been overly cautious. The threat might not have been as serious as we believed. Camilla settled into her chair with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap like a diplomat preparing for difficult negotiations. I know, she said simply. That was one of the phone calls I made this afternoon. I spoke directly with Marcus's wife at the hospital. She explained exactly what he was planning, and, you're right, it was celebrity gossip, not state secrets. Charles felt relief and horror warring in his chest. Relief that Camilla now understood the situation fully, but horror at the implications of what that understanding meant for their relationship. My dear, if you know that the threat was overblown, then surely you can understand that we were acting on the best information available at the time. We made difficult decisions under pressure, with incomplete knowledge, trying to protect the institution and everyone associated with it. Yes, Camilla agreed, you did exactly that. You acted to protect the institution, without sufficient regard for the human cost, based on assumptions rather than facts. You chose to destroy my family relationships rather than take the time to properly assess the actual threat level. Charles sat down across from her, trying to read her expression and finding it unnervingly neutral. What are you saying, Camilla? What decision are you leading toward? She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if memorizing it. I'm saying that I spent the afternoon thinking very carefully about who I am, what I value, and what I'm willing to sacrifice for this institution. I've thought about the woman I was before I became queen consort, and the woman I've become since wearing the crown. And what have you concluded? That some prices are too high to pay, even for love. She stood and moved to her window, looking out at the palace gardens where they had shared so many private moments. Charles, I love you deeply. I have loved you for decades, through scandals and separations and public humiliation. I stood by you when the world called me a homewrecker, when people threw bread rolls at me in public, when I was the most hated woman in Britain. You did, he agreed, fear growing in his chest. And I have never stopped being grateful for that loyalty, that strength, that unwavering support. But the woman who showed that strength, Camilla continued, was someone who put family and personal relationships above public opinion and social pressure. She was someone who believed that love and loyalty were more important than reputation and protocol. And now you're asking me to become someone completely different, someone who abandons family for institutional loyalty, someone who values political calculation over human bonds. Charles stood and moved toward her, but she held up a hand to stop him. I need to finish what I'm saying, Charles. Because what I've realized today is that I can't be both the woman you fell in love with and the queen consort you need me to be. The demands of the crown require me to betray the very values that made you love me in the first place. That's not true, Charles protested desperately. The demands of the crown are temporary, crisis-driven responses. Once this situation is resolved, once the immediate threats are contained, we can find ways to rebuild the relationships that have been damaged. Camilla turned from the window to face him directly, and Charles saw something in her eyes that chilled him to the bone. It wasn't anger or sadness, it was resolution. Can we? She asked quietly. Because I don't think and will ever forgive me for choosing the crown over family loyalty. I don't think I'll ever forgive myself for becoming someone who could make that choice. And I don't think you'll ever be able to trust me to put institutional needs ahead of personal relationships when the next crisis arises. We can work through this, Charles said desperately. Together, as we always have. Camilla, you can't let one difficult decision destroy everything we've built together. One decision? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Charles, this isn't about one decision. This is about discovering that the institution we serve requires me to become someone I can't live with being. This is about realizing that being queen consort means abandoning every value that made me worthy of the role in the first place. The room fell silent except for the sound of Charles's heart pounding in his ears. He was witnessing something he had never imagined possible, the dissolution of the partnership that had sustained him through the most difficult period of his life, the questioning of everything they had built together, the potential end of the great love story that had defined his personal happiness. What are you telling me, Camilla? He asked, though he was terrified of the answer. She moved to her desk and picked up a sealed envelope, holding it carefully as if it contained something precious and dangerous.
I'm telling you that some things, once broken, cannot be repaired.
Some choices, once made, change us so fundamentally that we can never return to who we were before. The envelope in her hands looked official, formal, and final. Charles realized with growing horror that his wife had spent her afternoon not just making phone calls, but preparing documents that could change everything about their future together. The breaking point had arrived, and neither of them was prepared for what would come next. The envelope trembled in Camilla's hands as she faced her husband across the sitting room that had once been their private sanctuary. Outside, the sound of protests had grown louder throughout the evening, with chants of "Restore the family" and "Royal accountability" echoing through the palace walls. The weight of public anger, family betrayal, and personal devastation had created a pressure that was about to explode in ways neither of them could have imagined. "Before you open that envelope," Camilla said quietly, "I need you to understand something. Every word I'm about to speak comes from a place of love, but also from a place of profound disillusionment with what we've become." She moved to stand behind her favorite chair, using it as a shield between them. "Charles, do you remember what you said to me the night you proposed? Not the first time, decades ago when we were too young and too bound by duty, but the second time, when we finally had the chance to build a life together?" Charles felt his throat tighten with emotion as the memory surfaced. It had been in this very room, actually, during the early days of their relationship becoming public. He had knelt beside this same chair where she now stood, promising her that they would face whatever challenges came their way as partners, that no institution or protocol would ever come between their love and loyalty to each other. "You said that you had learned the difference between serving the crown and being enslaved by it," Camilla continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You promised that our marriage would be built on the foundation that some things, love, family, human decency, were non-negotiable, even when duty demanded otherwise." "I remember," Charles whispered, the words cutting through him like glass. "Then, explain to me how we got here," she demanded, her composure finally beginning to crack. "Explain how the man who promised to protect our human bonds from institutional demands ended up destroying my family to serve those same institutional demands. Explain how love became negotiable after all." Charles moved toward her instinctively, but stopped when he saw her physically recoil from his approach. "Camilla, the circumstances were extraordinary. The threat seemed real, the timeline was immediate, the potential consequences were catastrophic. I had to make decisions with incomplete information under tremendous pressure." "You had to," she repeated slowly. "Or you chose to. Because from where I stand, Charles, it looks like you chose the easier path. It was easier to ban my family than to take the time to properly investigate the threat. It was easier to destroy established relationships than to risk the possibility that tabloids might publish embarrassing stories. It was easier to sacrifice my happiness than to appear weak or indecisive." The accusation hung between them like a blade, cutting deeper because Charles recognized the truth in it. He had chosen the path that seemed to offer the most protection for the monarchy, without fully considering the human cost to the woman he claimed to love above all else. "That's not fair," he said weakly. "You know how much I love you, how much your happiness means to me. This decision was torture precisely because I knew what it would cost you personally." "If you knew what it would cost me," Camilla shot back, "then you also knew that you were asking me to pay a price that would fundamentally change who I am. You knew that forcing me to choose between family loyalty and royal duty would destroy something essential in my character. And you asked me to pay that price anyway." Charles felt the weight of her words settling into his chest like stones. She was right, he had known exactly what he was asking of her, and he had convinced himself that her love for him would make the sacrifice bearable. He had gambled with her essential nature and lost everything. "The envelope, Camilla," he said quietly. "What's in the envelope?" She looked down at the document in her hands as if seeing it for the first time. "This is a formal request to the palace administration for a separation of duties between the king and queen consort. I'm asking to be relieved of all official royal responsibilities while retaining my title and our marriage. Essentially, I want to withdraw from public royal life while remaining your wife in private." The words hit Charles like a physical blow. "You want to abdicate your role as queen consort?" "I want to stop being someone I don't recognize," she replied. I want to go back to being the woman you fell in love with, the woman who put family and personal relationships above protocol and political calculation. I can't do that while serving as queen consort, because the role demands qualities that are antithetical to my core values. Charles felt the room spinning around him as the implications became clear.
Camilla withdrawing from royal duties would be seen as a rebuke to his leadership, a vote of no confidence in the monarchy's direction.
It would generate more damaging headlines, more questions about the institution's moral authority, more speculation about the stability of their marriage.
You can't be serious, he said desperately.
Camilla, if you withdraw from royal duties now, in the middle of this crisis, it will be interpreted as you abandoning the monarchy when it needs you most.
The damage would be catastrophic.
The damage is already catastrophic, she replied calmly. The question is whether we're going to compound it by continuing to pretend that I can serve effectively as queen consort while fundamentally disagreeing with the values the role demands. Before Charles could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. Sir Clive's voice came through the door with barely controlled panic. Your Majesty, Your Royal Highness, I'm terribly sorry, but we have an emergency situation. And Parker Bowles has collapsed at the hospital. Camilla dropped the envelope, her face going white.
What happened? Is she all right? Sir Clive entered the room, his expression grave.
She suffered what appears to be a severe anxiety attack or possibly a minor heart episode. The stress of the day, combined with the vigil at Marcus's bedside, seems to have overwhelmed her. She's stable but has been admitted for observation.
The news hit Camilla like a physical blow.
Her sister, the woman who had raised her, supported her through every crisis, stood by her through decades of public scrutiny, was now in a hospital bed, the second family casualty of Charles's decision to prioritize royal security over human relationships. I have to go to her, Camilla said immediately, moving toward the door.
Absolutely not, Charles said firmly. The hospital will be surrounded by media.
Any visit from you will be photographed, analyzed, interpreted as either too little too late or as defying the banning order.
The political implications would be severe.
Camilla stopped dead in her tracks, turning to stare at her husband with an expression of such shock and disbelief that Charles immediately realized his mistake. But the words were already spoken, the priorities already revealed with devastating clarity. My sister is in the hospital, she said slowly, her voice barely controlled, and your first concern is the political implications of me visiting her. Not her health, not her emotional state, not the fact that stress over this situation may have contributed to her collapse. Your first concern is how it will look in the newspapers. Charles reached toward her desperately.
That's not what I meant.
Of course I'm concerned about Anne's welfare, but, Camilla, we have to consider all the implications of our actions.
A hospital visit right now could make the situation worse for everyone.
Worse for who? She demanded, her voice rising.
Worse for the institution? Worse for your public image?
Because I can't imagine how it could be worse for Anne, who is lying in a hospital bed believing that her own sister has chosen royal protocol over family loyalty. Sir Clive cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps I should mention that the hospital has issued a statement saying that and specifically asked not to be contacted by any members of the royal family. She apparently told the doctors that she doesn't want to be another burden on their institutional obligations. The words hit Camilla like a slap. Her sister's rejection, couched in terms that clearly referenced their earlier conversation, was the final confirmation that the bridge between them had been burned beyond repair.
And didn't just feel abandoned, she felt betrayed by someone she had trusted completely.
She doesn't want to see me, Camilla whispered, sinking into